Hi, it's Kevin May here in the PhocusWire studio at the Phocuswright Conference 2021. Delighted, I must say, to be joined finally, because we're trying to remember if we have met over the storied
Many
histories
years.
that we have. Delighted to be joined by Alex Zoghlin. You're now the CEO of ATPCO, so delighted that you could join us, as I say.
Thank you.
Okay, right. I'm going to throw something back at you now. So, Mike,
One of my famous quotes from 20 years ago.
it's actually only from 2 years ago,
Okay.
which is perhaps even worse, right? So 2 years ago, in an interview that you did with us on the eve or just after you joined ATPCO, you said ATPCO is a hard company to work with.
Okay, yes.
Okay.
I don't disagree with that still.
Is that still the case, or what? Or indeed, the follow-on question is, what have you done to fix that?
Yeah. You know, what I was trying to explain was the arcana of published fairs is not simple to go into. In fact, I have, because we have a fair amount of new people in the organization, including the Root Happy group that we bought, that didn't come from the fair filing world. So one of the first things that I've done actually is reinstitute some training inside the organization so that the organization actually all understands what we do in the history of ATPCO, because if we don't know that, it's hard to know where we're going.
Okay.
So we're still hard to work with. I'll be the first one to admit that. But
And it's
we're
interesting
getting
that
better.
you admit that. Not many company CEOs would say 2 years after they took over the thing.
It's only been a year.
Well, that's,
January.
that's where my research has failed me, but people forgive me for this all the time.
It
Please
feels
carry
like
on.
10, so that's okay.
Well, it's the lost year, as we know, isn't
Yes.
it?
So you know, for me, this is a little bit of a journey. We have to recognize those things internally before we can really figure out how ATPCO can be more approachable. We have done a number of new things. I think we recently announced our AAC committees, and
Yep.
that's a way to get the rest of the industry to actually participate in our change, if you will. So as we think about what is the future of fair filing, I propose that the future of fair filing will look very different than it does today. You should almost think about fair filing as a catalog of products that you can assemble together to create whatever you want. In the historical world, you had to do this all before you could actually book it. I think in the future, you'll be able to do it in real time.
Right.
So we're starting down that journey. And we want to make sure that we do it in a way that we set new types of standards that lets new companies come into the industry, lets old companies compete more effectively, and basically creates a level playing field for what I would consider the next generation of companies that really want to help the industry take it to the next level.
So it's good that you said the word standards, because you can't move for 5 seconds at an airline distribution conference, for example, let alone here without somebody mentioning NDC, which was supposed to be the standard to the rule them all. Some positioned it as. So what other standards do you think are necessary, Alex?
Well, NDC is a distribution standard. It's defining what the pipe is. It's not defining what the conversation is. Those are two different things. And we've been talking about the pipe for a long time now. I think it's time to start to talk about the conversation. What comes down the pipe, if it's not interesting or if it's not valuable to the consumer, it doesn't matter how many new pipes you have. Yep. So part of our remit really going forward is how can we energize NDC in a way to have the information coming down it really relevant to sellers and consumers going forward, and what can we do that really transcends what the old world did. You know, that's one of the, I'm not going to say problems with ATV with NDC is, but I'll say one of the challenges it has is as people start to adopt it, they're used to other capabilities in the old world that now don't exist in the new world. That's usually okay if the advantages outweigh the negatives. But what we have historically seen, and I'm going to put blame on us a little bit, on ATPCO, what we've seen is the fares that are available in the traditional distribution are the same fares you're getting through NDC. It's all ATPCO data at the end of the day. So we, as ATPCO, really have to help the industry think about, now that we've broken free of how these things had to be put together in the old world, how can we reimagine that they get put together to create a more compelling, we call it dynamic offers, not dynamic pricing, a more compelling consumer value proposition in the new world. And we think that we're in a really good position to help that.
It sounds utopian, you want to get there, but there are clearly many barriers in lots of ways. So what would be, you say, the biggest hurdle that you need to overcome to take this vision for multiple standards, price offers, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah. So we're doing things differently than I think we have historically. So usually whenever anything changed at ATPCO, this would be we try to get the entire industry to stand up and move forward, and we all agree upon it before we ever actually do it. What we're actually doing now is we're thinking a little bit more like a startup, trying to really push innovation. I'll call it the big I rather than little I. So we're doing some things that I call the coalition of the willing. So can we find an airline that really wants to do this? Can we find a seller that's interested? Can IATA participate in this? And let's create a proof of concept that can we actually change how we're doing things in a way that really gives the industry the ability to make interesting and compelling capability without having to rewire the entire infrastructure, because that's what everybody's afraid of. I believe it's possible. Okay. You really have to know the details to make it work, which is why I think we're uniquely positioned to do it. So we actually have a couple airlines in the chute already that we're trying this with, and if they work, we can bring those back into our standards infrastructure, our AAC, and we can start to build those as new types of standards on how you file for a dynamic future. There's also some things that probably have to happen. I'm not going to say NDC, but there's another set of messages that have to be there. Yep. For us, a lot of it's around metadata. It's not just about the fare. It's about, if you want all those attributes, if you really want to be able to retail, there's a lot of other content that has to be there. Route Happy is a good example of some of those types of content. So we're looking at how we can integrate those two and make it easy and seamless. There's a few other things that happen in the old world that we think that we can help standardize in the new world.
Such as?
How you get access to private fares and net fares. Right, those are those require somebody to authenticate that you really have. We're as good as any to probably be that authenticator. Most of that data already flows through ATPCO. So why don't we just make it available in NDC? These are common things that people poke NDC about, that, it doesn't have, private fares, and it doesn't have Interline is always a good example. Well, we are the company that actually helped define the rules around Airline. We think that we can help that on the NDC side too. Okay. So short answer is, I think we're posed as the kind of the honest broker in the middle. Okay. We're not here to take from one party to give to the other. We're here to make sure that the entire industry is best positioned to really help move this thing forward. Yeah,
because you've got a fairly unique ownership structure, haven't you?
We do. We're primarily owned by airlines. I shouldn't say primarily. We are owned by airlines. I have a board of directors of 10 executives from 10 different airlines, which...
that must be fun.
Always fun, yeah.
Okay, so Route Happy, which was an acquisition quite a few years ago, yes. And it was always interesting what they were doing. We were big fans of what they'd built as a startup, and the acquisition made a lot of sense, I think, for ATPCO. Yeah. But for when you apply that philosophy with what you're trying to do and what they were trying to do to the wider industry, do you sense that airlines still need to be educated about retailing and some of those elements, or are we over that hump now? We need to stop talking about it and just get on with it.
It's a normal distribution. So there are some airlines that, in my opinion, are the forefront of this, yeah. And there are some airlines that aren't even taking advantage of the of the old ATPCO and all the capabilities you could have done with branded fares and multiple fare points.
Why is that then that some do and some don't? Is it just a sense of what their priorities are or are not?
Where they are in that sophistication, I would argue there are some airlines that don't need to. They might be in a captive market. They view maybe themselves more as transportation than as a brand, but there's others that are in highly competitive markets, and that differentiation is incredibly important to them so that customers can make a good informed choice. They're not just, the seats aren't equivalent across carriers. So the more important that becomes, the more important all that metadata becomes to make sure that a consumer has the right information at the right time to make the right decisions.
Okay. So, I mean, I think I started writing about online travel and travel technology about 15 years ago. And, one of the trends and the big kind of issues that was around at the time was the rise of the genies. And there are many of us who will remember, especially you, because you were heavily involved in G2 Switchworks. How do you reflect on that time? Because it was kind of, in some circles, that it was held up as this new kind of thing. I mean, how do you reflect on that now?
Well, it's back to the future for me in some ways.
Yeah.
I laugh because exactly the same issues that existed 15 years ago in that direct distribution exist today in NDC.
But what does that say to you, therefore, about the pace of change in the industry? If you say it is back to the future for you, it's a 15-year gap and it's the same thing.
Well, the difference for me is I now know what the problems are and I know how to fix them.
Yeah, and you're probably in a better position to solve it.
And I'm in a much better position to be able to fix them.
Right.
That's exactly right. Yeah, in some ways, you could kind of joke. I'm trying to finish what I started 20 years ago in some ways. Maybe the two primary differences are, in those days, we weren't concerned about changing the conversation. It was who's going to get access to the published fares and who wasn't. Yeah. Now it's really, what is that conversation with the consumer? The second one was NDC, that old NDC or direct distribution was really all about the economics of the industry. Yeah. And it may still be about the economics for some airlines, but a lot more airlines are focused on it, about changing the conversation. How can we get more sophisticated as retailers, get a better intimacy and interaction with the consumer? And NDC is well positioned to be able to do that.
Okay, and if we can go back even further, if I may, to Orbitz.
Yes.
How do you reflect on that time?
Well, I was in my 20s, late 20s. Everything is great in your late 20s. Yeah, I mean, that was my introduction to the airline industry. Yeah. In some ways, I probably haven't changed very much. In some ways, I have. The ways that I have changed, I'll tell you, we went into that. We had partnered with ITA Software, which didn't have a customer at the time. Yeah. We were trying to invent stuff, right? We were going to build the matrix display to show all airlines, comprehensive, unbiased, which had never been done before. And literally everybody said it wasn't possible. And if I took my current self, I would look back on that and laugh about how dumb we were thinking we were going to make this work. But we did. We actually did make it work. And funny enough, that was the start of direct distribution. We had something we called Direct Connect back at the day, and basically we took the bookings on Orbitz and we booked them directly on the carrier's partition. That was a way for us to guarantee that we continued to have web fares and access to all fares, but it was also a financial bypass. Orbitz was primarily owned by the airlines, and they wanted.
You're quite used to that.
I am, I guess. They wanted the lowest distribution, so gosh, I feel like I'm tilting at the same windmills here, aren't I?
Okay, that's great. Thank you for allowing me to cast your mind back a little bit and talk more about modern things with ATPCO. Alex Zoghlin from ATPCO. Thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Take care.
Thank you.